Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming here and joining us on this beautiful rainy day. As some of you may know, yesterday was Constitution Day, which is to celebrate the drafting of the United States Constitution. Of course, it took a bit of time for it to get ratified and go into effect, but that's when they said, okay, we've got something that we are going to go with, at least see if the states will agree to it. So yesterday was Constitution Day, but it was Sunday, so we didn't hold an event then. And Brescia and any other school that receives federal funding has to hold a Constitution Day event. However, that's not such a bad thing because we get to learn about all sorts of exciting topics. So the U.S. Constitution forms the basis for the government in the United States and in some ways set the tone for a national culture when it comes to the area of politics. Today we're lucky to have Nahid Martaza join us for a special presentation on Sharia and the U.S. Constitution. She holds her JD in law, well, of course, in law, from John Marshall Law School in Chicago, and she practiced in Illinois until she moved to Owensboro, but is still holds a law license in the state of Illinois. She's lectured extensively on the subject of Islam as it relates to many things socially and politically in our culture. And she also has been nice enough to teach for us at Brescia University. And this spring she'll be teaching politics and social issues again for the second time. And we're very lucky to have her join us today. So would you please welcome to the stage Nahid Martaza.
Thank you so much. In the name of God, most beneficent, most merciful, good afternoon. I'd like to start by showing just a quick little clip, and then we'll start the lecture soon after.
So I'm really honored by the crowd, and we're going to have some fun now because instead of making a speech, which I've been doing over and over and over, I want to take questions. Don't we like that, right? Okay. All right, let's start with this group right over here. Come on. Okay, this man, I like this guy.
From White Plains. Amen. Okay. We have a problem in this country. It's called Muslims. We know our current president is one.
Right.
You know he's not even an American.
We need this
Birth
question.
certificates,
This
man.
first question.
But anyway, we have training camps growing where they want to kill us. Mm-hmm. That's my question. When can we get rid of
We're
them?
going to be looking at a lot of different things. And, you know, a lot of people are saying that, and a lot of people are saying that bad things are happening out there. We're going to be looking at that and plenty of other things.
Well then, so I'm just going to go straight to the lecture. I needed to show you that to set that tone for this lecture. So I'm a proud history major, a graduate of Loyola University, a Jesuit school. And during my final semester there, I came across a book where the author stated that with the demise of the Soviet Union and the Red Scare, within the next several years, the U.S. would have a new scare: Islam. The author based his understanding on his projection of the effects of foreign policy in the Middle East. Fast forward to 24 years later, where life kind of comes full circle. Last year this time, on my last day of dropping my son off to school, he got his license that day, he said something that both surprised and startled me. He said, "Mom, I heard you practicing your presentation, and you sounded very mean. Could you tone it down a bit? You know, I mean, you're already scary looking with that headscarf on your head. Could you be a little nicer?" I initially laughed at his comment, but then I thought, do I really look like this to everyone? Do others perceive my faith in the same context? Hopefully not, but just in case, for the record, I'm not here to hurt anyone. I think bunnies are super cute, and my favorite color is navy blue. With that said, let's begin. Ignorance leads to fear, fear leads to hate, and hate leads to violence. That's a quote which I hope many of you have read before. It's from a famous Muslim scholar, Ibn Rashid, better known by his Latin name, Averroes. Coincidentally, my 10-year-old read this and said that he knew this quote quite well. He said, "Averroes wasn't the one who said that, Mom. It was Yoda." So for the sake of listening to Yoda, I ask that you all kindly collect your understandings of Sharia and Islam into your mental trash bins and hit the delete buttons. Chances are the knowledge you have is not entirely factually based, and we must start from a clean slate in order to understand the topic today. One last thing, I must ask that you also put aside any preconceived opinions you have of either or both topics. You are here to understand laws, freedoms, and their limitations impartially. To do anything less would be a disservice to yourselves and to those who you are judging discriminately. So first things first, we will begin with the simple definition of Sharia and go from there. Sharia means, literally, Arabic to English translation, clear path to water. Water here is meant as divine guidance or divine law for success and salvation for Muslims. Although it's not a correct translation, we will replace Sharia with the word law as it is commonly understood as such. Although we are looking at Islamic law and how it functions within the limits of the U.S. Constitution, it is also imperative that we take a brief look at the basic functionality and effects of other religions being practiced under the umbrella of the Constitution. Every religion has its own laws. The total number of faith groups cannot be calculated in the U.S. since everybody has their own definition of faith group and religion. Here in the United States, there are approximately 200 million religions in the U.S. Because of the limited time, we will only examine the 3 Abrahamic religions and their practice within the constraints of the U.S. Constitution and their impact on the Constitution itself. I will be reciting 3 various prayers from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam: the Shema, the Lord's Prayer, and Surah Al-Fatiha. These prayers are each religion's path to water, to salvation, to divine guidance, so to speak. Feel free to recite along. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord you should love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. For Christianity, I will recite the Lord's Prayer as it occurs in Matthew chapter 6, verses 9 through 13. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For Islam, I will recite what's called the opening chapter. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, Praise be to God, the cherisher and sustainer of the world, most gracious, most merciful, master of the day of judgment. Thee do we worship, and thine aid we seek. Show us the straight way, the way of those on whom thou hast bestowed thy grace, those whose portion is not wrath, and who go not astray. These prayers can be seen as each religion's example for a path to divine guidance and to salvation. By reciting these prayers, its adherents are practicing their faith as defined and prompted by their particular faith, belief system, or religion, which is in fact guiding them towards something. These prayers all come from ethical and moral codes taught by all of these religious traditions. Let's now look to the source of these prayers, where the guidance is coming from exactly. Let's look at the religious traditions and the laws of the three Abrahamic traditions. For Christianity, Christian laws, the ethical and moral code of conduct, is embodied in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Mosaic or divine law, known as the Ten Commandments, and from the Gospel, instructions of Jesus, peace be upon him. The Catholics, Anglican, and Orthodox churches follow canon law, while practice and procedure is canon law followed by the Presbyterian Reformed Church. The Lutheran Church follows the Book of Concord, and the United Methodist Church follows the Book of Discipline. If you're Catholic, canon law applies to you. It doesn't override civil law, but it exists side by side. Interesting fact, canon law is the oldest continuously functioning legal system in the Western world, predating the common law and European civil law traditions. So as Christians, you are all following your own Christian laws, or Christian Sharia, daily. Same goes for Jews. For Judaism, the Jewish law, or the halakha, which means the way to behave, is understood to be the collective body of religious laws, derived from the written and oral Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah, and the Midrash. Jewish law draws no distinction between religious or non-religious life. Basically, it guides day-to-day life. It's enforced by the Jewish rabbinical courts. There are a number of halakha rabbinical courts in the U.S. For example, Agudath Israel of America and Beth Din. They reside over matters pertaining to Jewish religious life: divorce, kosher certifications, conversions, slaughtering examinations, burial practices, and at times civil disputes. And this might come as a surprise to you, but the halakha courts are already functioning within the legal system of the U.S. Under American law, the procedures and rulings for Jewish law courts are treated just as any other produced by a legal arbitration hearing. So let's stop here and make sense of this so far. We have listed different types of religious laws commonly followed by Christians and Jews in their day-to-day lives. Christians and Jews are practicing their religion simultaneously alongside the U.S. Constitution. The practice of all religions is protected under the First Amendment. The Establishment Clause forbids the government from passing legislation to establish an official religion or prefer one religion over the other. The Free Exercise Clause reserves the right for individuals to accept any religious belief and engage in any religious ritual. Time to talk about the elephant in the room: Islamic Sharia, or Islamic law. To understand Islamic Sharia, one must understand a bit of the basics of Islam. Islam is a non-denominational monotheistic religion that has 7 faith essentials. Belief in one God, his angels, his scriptures, his prophets, the day of judgment, everything good or bad is predestined by God, and life after death. Belief in practice includes primarily oneness of God and the belief that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. Pray 5 times. Give charity to the poor yearly. It's approximately 2.3 of your unused wealth. Fast in the month of Ramadan. Perform pilgrimage to Mecca once in a lifetime if financially capable of. The holy book is the Quran, which is considered the word of God. Muslims are governed by a combination of the Quran and the Sunnah, which is the Prophet's sayings, teachings, and traditions. The Sharia is the collection of values and principles derived from the Quran and Sunnah that form the moral, religious, and legal teachings of Islam, known as Islamic law in the West. It is distinguished from fiqh, jurisprudence, which is the practical application of those principles in real life. So in other words, the Sharia may be called the spirit of the law, while fiqh may be called the application of the law by jurists. Sharia is overwhelmingly concerned with personal religious observance, such as prayer and fasting. The primary sources of the Islamic Sharia law are the Quran, considered again the word of God, the Sunnah, which is the prophetic example, and the consensus of scholars, and by analogy, which means that many regional and local customs are also accepted as source of the Sharia when they are consistent with the general good. Thus, the Sharia mandates that Muslims follow the good and generally wholesome customs of the lands in which they live in. Islamic law is a fixed source of guidance, which is opened to interpretation by jurists. There are 4 core values or aims of the Sharia: justice, mercy, welfare, and wisdom. There are 5 legal goals as well: protection of life, religion, property, intellect, and family. How do Muslims practice their divine guidance? Many American Muslims, like other religious communities who rely on scriptures and religious principles to guide their life, look upon Sharia as a personal system of morality and identity. The vast majority of American Muslims see no conflict between their religious obligations and values and the U.S. legal system. It's how we raise our children, give charity, pray, fast, marry, divorce, eat, sleep, etc. Do we have the same protection as other faith groups? Yes, just like how the Christians follow canon law and the Jews follow halakha in their daily lives. We have arbitration courts, just like the Jews, and it's how we celebrate our own religious holidays, just like how other denominations are allowed to celebrate theirs. So practicing our faith is no different than how Jews, Catholics, Protestants, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Wicca, Lutheran, and Mormons all practice their faiths. This is a right guaranteed by the First Amendment to all. Is the Islamic Sharia compatible with the U.S. Constitution? Yes. For example, both allow rights to personal property, mutual consent to contracts, people are presumed innocent until proven guilty, women's right to initiate divorce is also the same, and a woman's right to vote, which is similar to American constitutional democracy: life, liberty, happiness, common good, justice, equality, diversity, truth, popular sovereignty, and patriotism. Common misconceptions. Sharia is religious law for everyone. I hope maybe you guys have an understanding. The answer is no. Sharia law is not religious law made for everyone. It is only applicable to Muslims. American law does not govern Muslims living in the U.S. The U.S. Constitution governs Muslims living here. The Sharia tells us to honor the law of the land because the Sharia only governs in religious matters. Respect the law of the land or leave it. The Constitution does not recognize religious freedom. I hope we have a handle on that. Wrong. Constitution does recognize religious freedom. First Amendment's Establishment Clause and Exercise Clauses guarantee that. Do American Muslims want to replace the U.S. Constitution with Sharia? Sorry, just want to kind of leave you hanging there. No. American Muslims overwhelmingly support the U.S. Constitution and do not seek to replace it with Sharia or Islamic law. The vast majority of American Muslims understand Sharia as a personal religious obligation governing the practices of their faith, not as something American governments should enforce. Do other faith groups want to replace the U.S. Constitution with their own laws? Good question. It's a good question to ask all other faiths, especially since American Muslims have been asked this already. Coincidentally, a survey from the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, a nonpartisan think tank that focuses on American Muslims, last year, 2016, surveyed Muslims, Jews, Protestants, and Catholics to examine their attitudes on various issues, including politics, religion, violence, and identity. One out of the 5 things it found most interesting was that Protestants are more likely than Muslims to think that their religion should be the main source of law in America. Is taking into account Muslim practices in the U.S. courts an example of what some are calling creeping Sharia in the American legal system? And how do you explain U.S. courts interpreting contacts based on Sharia law? So Sharia is not creeping into the U.S. court system. There are 3 types of cases that may require a court to even take notice of Sharia. The first is a case in which a party alleges that some government practice interfered with his or her ability to practice his faith as required by Sharia law. Such a free exercise claim is identical to claims that government practices violates Jewish law, canon law, or other religious laws. Courts decide only whether the claim is sincere and whether the government's actions violate the person's right. The second is an arbitration agreement providing for arbitration under Sharia law. These can be enforced by courts if voluntary and not in violation of public policy. The third and the least common case is one in which a foreign country's law governs a dispute, for instance, an accident that might have occurred abroad, and the country's law includes Sharia law. In general, the same rule applies. American courts will not interpret religious law and will not apply foreign law in violation of basic public policies. The rules are no different for Islamic law than for canon law, halacha, or other religious laws. Did you hear about FMG, honor killings, and that women have no rights in Islam? Like I heard it from the mainstream media, so it has to be the truth. Female genital mutilation is not allowed in Islam. Honor killings are not allowed in Islam, period. Both are cultural problems, country problems, based on a lack of education of religious laws and rights. Ignorance is the problem. They are not part of Islamic law in any way, shape, or form. Islamic law doesn't provide rights for women. That's a very common question. This couldn't be more further from the truth. Basic facts: men and women are considered equal before God, except for their acts of piety and good deeds. This is the only way one can be better than the other, but only to be judged by God. In 1920, the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. 1,400 years ago, Muslim women were given that right, along with the right to educate themselves, to inherit, to marry, to have a prenuptial agreement for their marriage, to initiate and get a divorce, to keep all her money, and my personal favorite right: what's yours is mine, but what's mine is not yours. Meaning that the husband must provide for the family. She does not have to at all unless she wishes to, which will be seen as an act of charity before God. These rights were given to Muslim women over 1,400 years ago. Yet sadly, Muslim women are not freely practicing their God-given rights. This is due to, in part, because of a lack of self-education, topped off with tyrannical rulers and misogynistic politicians and governments. For American Muslim women, I can most certainly say that the American legal system protects their God-given Sharia rights perhaps even better than the Muslim women residing in Islamic countries. The problem with practicing. So what are some of the problems American Muslims are facing while practicing their faith? A ban on Sharia or Islamic law is legislation that would ban the application or implementation of Islamic law in courts in any jurisdiction. Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, there has been 120 anti-Sharia law bills that have been introduced in 42 states since 2010. As of 2017, 13 states have introduced anti-Sharia law bill, with Texas and Arkansas enacting the legislation prohibiting state courts from considering foreign, international, or religious law. Anything wrong with this? You bet. It's singling out a specific religious group which has some serious unintended consequences for people of all faiths, example of which would be disrupting family life. Marriage licenses, prenuptial agreements, adoption agreements, divorce decrees, and child custody orders may not be honored in several U.S. states simply because they are based on a religious creed or foreign law. Frustrating religious arbitrations. Since most foreign law bans also apply to arbitration tribunals, they call into question the ability of religious believers to settle family and other personal disputes through arbitration. Would it be a potential First Amendment violation? Violating the separation of powers, perhaps? The separation of powers prevents the concentration, of course, of too much power in any one branch of government. Giving state legislatures the power to dictate what legal sources the courts can look at when interpreting the law undermines this fundamental principle of American governance. Invalidating court decisions in other states, state courts are bound to give full faith and credit to court decisions of other states. A foreign law ban could affect that agreement when another state has considered foreign laws. For example, Jews must first acquire permission from the Beth Din rabbinical court before believers pursue complaints through the secular court systems. Muslims can also have their inheritance, business, and matrimonial disputes sorted out by Islamic scholars, saving a whole heck of time and money for everyone. Foreign law bans would have devastating effects. The courts wouldn't be able to effectively interpret laws on international marriages, international adoptions, business dealings, and even human rights issues. Bans like these would have to impact all religious communities, and all would object. All should object, and thankfully all are objecting. So recent cases. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits employers from discriminating against employees on the basis of sex, race, color, national origin, and religion. There was a case, I don't know if you guys remembered this last year. It was the Equal Employment Opportunity, the EEOC, versus Abercrombie and Fitch. The United States Supreme Court ruled in favor of the EEOC and the hijab-wearing applicant who was not hired. So the takeaway from this is the judgment clarified the standard for proving discrimination in a religious accommodation case in which no request for accommodation was made. The takeaway decision was an employer may not make an applicant's religious practice, confirmed or otherwise, a factor in employment decisions. Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Places of public accommodation cannot discriminate or segregate based on race, color, religion, or national origin. Arkansas currently, from last year, Arkansas and Florida gun shops are banning Muslims. Could this be an example of that? Title II violation? It's kind of reminiscent of the days that have passed. Unfortunately, we're revisiting this type of discrimination. So I would like to leave you with two things. First, pay this information forward. Less fear, hatred, and violence is a good thing for all of humanity. Second, a saying by Umar ibn al-Khattab, may God be pleased with him, who said, acquire knowledge and teach people. Learn along with it dignity and tranquility for those who teach you, and humility for those whom you teach. Do not be tyrannical scholars and thus base your knowledge on your ignorance. It's up to us to continue to educate others and ourselves. I hope that I was able to help you understand that Sharia is the spirit of each religious law. We are all born with the potential to cultivate our innate goodness and essence. The respected Sharias of each religion are there to guide us in our respective journeys. And so our Constitution, its job is to protect all our endeavors with our respected Sharias. So by understanding what the Sharia actually means and where it stands in practice with the U.S. Constitution, I truly hope that you no longer see me like this. There truly is nothing to fear but fear itself, unless if this applies to you. So, folks, this is where I usually end this lecture. However, I think I must revisit the beginning video clip, which I did not in any way explain. So let's get to it. I would like to ask if you all please close your eyes. I'm going to tell a little story, and your eyes need to be closed. Imagine that a group of friends are seated having lunch. They are all heavily engaged in topics such as sports and work assignments until one says, "Do you believe in God?" So they all, one by one, take turns affirming their belief in God, until one of them is interrupted by another friend and is told, "No, you don't believe in God." The other replies, "Of course I do." Again, the one friend replies, "No, you don't. You don't believe that Jesus is God, so you really don't believe in God." The other again responds, "I believe that Jesus is a prophet of God. I believe that God sent him just like other prophets." The one friend says then, "No, you don't believe in God. Heck, you're not even an American." I'm an American. I was born in Chicago, he responds. So the conversation continued with the rest of the friends remaining silent and ended with this: no, you don't believe in God and you're not an American. Why don't you just go back to your country? Everyone knows that Muslims hate the Jews and the Christians. Go back to your country. There should be a big tidal wave to finish all of you off. Please continue to keep your eyes closed. If you were paying attention to the Islam 101 slide, you would have remembered me saying that Islam is a non-denominational faith. That is, that one can have an affiliation, any race, be any ethnicity, and still be a Muslim. And if you remember the First Amendment of the Constitution, under the Establishment and Free Exercise Clauses, our government may not favor one religion over the other, nor may it adopt or promote any one religion. And that each person may freely practice whatever religion he or she wishes to do so, or not. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the display of fear and hatred seen in the video shown at the beginning of this lecture is exactly what led to such a dialogue between the circle of friends. Go ahead and open your eyes. Do you see the Muslim in this picture? Which one is he? Truth. That dialogue happened. Truth. It was indeed a conversation amongst friends, but they were all first graders eating lunch in the school cafeteria. Truth. This happened to my 18-year-old son 13 years ago. The best thing we can all do to continue to make this nation great is to read, research, understand, and appreciate this amazing thing that gives each and every one of us our freedoms, rights, protections, and limitations, our Constitution. Happy Constitution Day.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Our speaker has graciously allowed some time for questions and answers. If you have questions, please come down to one of these microphones. And if you need the microphone brought to you, just raise your hand and I'll bring it to you.
Thanks, Nahida. Enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
The legislation you mentioned in Texas and Arkansas, what's happened to it? Has it been challenged in federal courts? The Supreme Court has ruled that international law, and including international customary law, are part of American law. So I can't see how they would stand up in federal court, but of course they can still cause a lot of trouble in state courts.
Yes. So to answer your question, very simply, no one has challenged it as of yet. So basically what's happening, if you understand the law, obviously we know that we have to climb from the state court and keep climbing up to the federal. So you know how we kind of mentioned that would this be a violation of the separation of powers? It kind of is, because what's happening is the legislature is enacting these laws, which they really know is not allowed, right? But until somebody challenges that in court, it's going to continue. So someone has to have standing, and someone has to take them to court, and you know, it's of course going to be a waste of taxpayer money and so on and so forth. But so there is literally a legitimate push in this direction to kind of circumvent the law of the land, really, but you do it through the state court system and wait. So unfortunately, you know, nothing has happened yet, but again, in the future, it's bound to happen, and unfortunately, the citizens are going to foot the bill for that. Well, back to the clip, I believe 2010, I think 120 states were getting, everything together to enact that legislation. As of this year, Arkansas and Texas passed it, but there's, I think, 13 or 14 that are going to push the bill in their own courts, in their own legislature this year. So, and the sad part is that, by law, they can't single out one religion, right? So de facto, all the religions will suffer, right? So it's kind of done so quietly and silently that all the religions, like the interfaith community, doesn't really recognize or realize that this is happening. To shun one religion out, all the others are suffering. So like I said, there has been some steps taken to, like some watch groups are out there to see how far this is going. But unfortunately, this is the direction that our state legislators are going in.
Hi.
Hi.
How are Muslim women today trying to better themselves and find equality in their in Muslim countries?
Well, there are over 54 Muslim countries. I believe 52 of which are secular, right? Gosh, I just had that fact. So I believe the Muslim majority countries are the first, one of the premier to have Muslim women as heads of state, which is kind of baffling where you have them as heads of state, yet they're suffering so much at the hands of I don't even think that you want to call it a male-dominated society. It's more of a misogynistic, understanding. So the one example that I give is that of Saudi Arabia. They don't allow women to drive, which is, weird because there's nothing according to Islamic law that says that. So it's very difficult, I think, for people that are not non-Muslims, to understand the distinction between the faith and, say, a country that's applying Sharia law. Because, if you think of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in Islam, kingdoms are prohibited because of dictatorship and because, the foundation should be of democracy. So if you just even look at that, you're kind of, questioning the fact that, well, okay, so then how is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia even there if Islamic law prohibits kingdoms, right? And then, so it's very hard to separate the law versus cultural impositions and also dictatorships, right? Or the governments that impose these ridiculous laws. I mean, it really goes to show that, they take away the power from the women. In secular countries, like Indonesia, so many other states, women actually are allowed to practice their faith, and it's sad because education is the key, right? You don't know your faith, then you don't know how to practice it. And quite honestly speaking, the United States is spot on with, freedom of religion and freedom for you to actually discover who you are, who your faith is, and how you can practice your faith accordingly. So the protections are there. And unfortunately, in Muslim countries, although they might have heads of state, the basic women, the women day-to-day lives and all that needs to improve because of the misogynistic views, which unfortunately are not part of the religion at all. I don't know if I answered your question. Okay. Well, so, so backing it up a little bit, Sharia law, Sharia, it means actually law, right? So the Sharia has a couple of components. Muslims follow the Quran, which is, we believe, the word of God, and the Sunnah, the tradition, the sayings, the teachings of the Prophet, okay? So with that combination, you have scholars, okay, that interpret that. We do not have a clergy system, okay? If there's anything, any issue that we have, we go into the Quran. We try to find the answer there. If not, we go into the Sunnah, the tradition of the Prophet. And if we don't have answers there, then we go to our learned scholars, right? And their learned scholars are, you know, top notch. I mean, they are very well versed in both the Quran and the Sunnah, and by analogy, they look to the customs, they look to the traditions of where the people are living, and then, you know, they will address the issue at that point. So we don't have a clergy system per se, but we do have just, you know, these two basic things that are guiding us. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a question about, you mentioned the clergy system, and that's kind of what I was going to ask in the first place. What does cause the difference between Muslims within a country like Iraq, where you have different sects of Muslims who seem on the surface to be antagonistic toward one another, to internal violence? What causes that?
Very simply, it's not what you seem, right? It's more, you know, people talk about sectarian violence between Sunni and Shia. That's regional based, right? It has nothing to do with the faith. It doesn't. If you mentioned Iraq, if you go there, you will see that for the most part, they do get along peacefully, right? Because that's just how it is. Now, if you throw into the pot MSM, mainstream media, and, you know, other political entities, they might stir that pot up very well. So you should always, I think, the rule of thumb is when you want to figure out, you know, what's going on in a country, basically sectarian-wise, why are people against each other and this and that? Typically, it's based on politics. It's not based on the faith, because the faith doesn't, you know, say, well, you need to hate each other because you're Sunni and you're Shia, right? It's just not how it is. I think that MSM does a disservice to the public where, you know, they might just show something and you might have some different idea of actually what is really going on. So, you know, I mean, it's common, you know, people pit people against each other, countries against each other. It's, you know, it's regional based, it's political based. So faith based, it has no solid standing. I hope I answered your question. So yeah. There is really no difference faith-based between groups at all? Well, yes. You talked about Iraq specifically. Now, if you're asking about the difference between Sunni and Shia, Sunni, if you remember, I said that Muslims follow two things, the Quran and the Sunnat. Sunni Muslim is one, he or she, who follows the tradition, the Sunnat of the Prophet, okay? And it goes back to historical times after the death of the Prophet. Before he actually passed away, he told the community, you must, after my demise, you must elect somebody, you know, democratically. And so people elected Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiqui. There was a part of few people who thought that the Prophet's son-in-law, Ali, Hazrat Ali, should have been the next in line. So now think about this. They wanted to go the hereditary line, right? They wanted to go family line, where Islam dictates that you must put that aside and you must do it, you know, with democracy. So the sweet twist of fate there is that you had 3 caliphs before Hazrat Ali was elected, so to speak. So that was the breakoff right there. Shia means friend of Ali. That was the split. Sunni Muslims represent about, I would say, 95% of the Muslims. Shia Muslims, 5%, 4%. So you can see them in various countries, but majority of the Muslims are Sunni. Yeah. So that is the little, riff, is because they wanted Hazrat Ali because he was not only the son-in-law, he was also his cousin. So that's basically the riff there. Sure.
So thank you all very much for coming out and joining us for this excellent presentation and for your questions and for celebrating the 230th birthday of the U.S. Constitution. Thank you, and I hope you all have a good day. Thank you to our speaker.
Thank you.